1, 2, 3, 4. Those are numbers, but you already knew that. If you want to know what number you're going to pay each month for your car, use Kelly Blue Book My Wallet on Auto Trader. They're really good at numbers. Auto Trader.
See this? This is my boomstick!
Hello and welcome to another episode of Unequal Sequel, Season 2 now. My name is Dave Curtis and I'm one of the two hosts of this fantastic podcast.
And I'm Rich and I'm the other host of this fantastic podcast. Think of me as Silent Bob to Dave's Jay. He talks all the time and I'm a tubby little stoner.
That's true. Again, these are great. The premise of Unequal Sequel is very simple. We ask our guests for their best ever sequel, worst ever sequel, and finally their dream sequel.
And of course, we often drift off and just have a general chat about movies and life in general.
I should also point out we do delve into spoiler territory, so be warned, we do, spoil some very old movies. So If you haven't seen the movies that we mention and you don't want them to be spoiled, move on.
Most of the movies we spoil are like 40 years old though, mate. So, if you've not seen them by now.
Especially on this one, these are old ones. On today's episode, we are very proud and so excited to be joined by Nick fucking Helm.
I'm so excited. Nick is a comedian, an actor, a writer, a podcaster, just a general all-round superhero. Honestly, if I sound a little starstruck in this recording, it's because I am. Because I love Nick Helm. I think he's amazing.
It does come across. We're very excited to sit down with Nick and chat all things sequels with him.
These are Nick Helm's Unequal Sequels. Enjoy. So you'll have spoken to Dave already, Nick, because Dave does all the work and I just turn up and talk about movies I've never seen before.
Yeah. But I think that's equal, right?
I believe so.
I'm taking that.
Because so Dave gears everything up so that you're primed, so that when you are unleashed, you do an hour of solid entertainment, solid sort of broadcasting.
Yeah. I mean, entertainment might be pushing it.
And then you go back in your box, and then
he's ready for the next one.
Yeah, and then Dave gets it all primed for the next one.
Rich is the brains. I got a bit of the knowledge. But...
Okay, you two are going to have to start taking the blame for this podcast that you're doing.
It's going all right so far.
You can't keep sort of like pointing at each other and saying it's their fault. All right? We're in it together.
Do you remember the first sequel you got excited about?
The first sequel I got excited about? Well, do you know what? I think probably, I can't remember what order it would have been in, but like 1989 was a huge year for franchises and sequels. So you had Star Trek 5, Lethal Weapon 2, Batman came out, Ghostbusters 2, Back to the Future 2. And so there was just like this endless list of sequels, and it was like everything was like fighting to survive. And I think Ghostbusters 2 did all. I think it's set at New Year, but I think it came out in the summer.
Right.
And Ghostbusters 2, I think, came out maybe a week before Batman. Everything basically cleared the way for Batman, and then Batman came out and trounced everything. But I remember going to see Ghostbusters 2 at the cinema. It was the first, I'd been 8 or 9. I think I'd probably be 8. And I was a big fan of the original Ghostbusters and the cartoon, The Real Ghostbusters. And then but I preferred the movies, although I found the first one very scary. I remember that Ghostbusters 2 was the first film that I didn't need to go for a wee during.
Ooh.
I think I saw it twice. And I think the first time I saw it, I did need a wee. And I came back during Vigo the Carpathian's head floating above a river of slime while he was doing that speech. So I missed that chunk. And I went to see it again, and I didn't go for a piss the whole film. And I remember Back to the Future 2, which would have been the same year. Remember when that came out? I remember being so stunned and shocked by that film like how incredible. I was too young for the first film when that came out. I remember when the first one came out, my sister got taken to see Back to the Future, and I got taken to see The Dark Cauldron,
All right.
which was like a really dark fantasy Disney movie. They were trying something different, and I remember sort of like going, "Oh yeah, it was all right." But my sister had like this like magazine with Back to the Future, and there was like cut out board game off the back of like shreddies for Back to the Future. And my sister sort of like was big into Back to the Future, but I was old enough for the sequel, and I just remember the sequel just blew my mind. It was like so much happened in it, and the special effects were so incredible, and the film was just amazing. And I just remember I came out of that film in sort of like this shocked, stunned silence. And although I found the film very like what was it? It was just like energizing. It was this. I found like afterwards, I slumped into like this little depression, which was I'm just like this 9-year-old fat kid from St Albans, and I don't want to be Marty McFly. I want to be Michael J. Fox. Do you know what I mean? And I was like that was the dream job. Do you know what I mean? So I guess that's one of the reasons that I ended up kind of like trying to do some acting and trying to make films and stuff, was the fact that Back to the Future 2 was huge. It's weird because I look back on it now, I don't love that film very much. I think Back to the Future is one of those films where you can kind of take or leave the sequels. The original is so perfect. I don't need anything else. And I think Back to the Future 2 is all right. I prefer Back to the Future 3, if anything, but like I don't need either of them. But in terms of looking forward to a film, I guess it'd be like Ghostbusters 2 or Back to the Future 2.
Did you get the T-shirts and stuff?
No, maybe with Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters was a little bit more marketable, and it was already a cartoon series.
Yeah.
But it was a weird time because I think it was difficult to. You'd see a poster for an upcoming film, or the Odeon used to have like Flicks magazine, which was like a free magazine.
Yeah, I remember that.
And you'd see like upcoming films in that, but it wasn't like now. Where, well, I mean, it's probably not even, I don't even mean now. I mean, probably 10 years ago when you'd have like all the new trailers would come out. And even going back to sort of like dial up, you'd have to sort of download a trailer, which would take a few hours. And then you'd watch like a 2.5 minute trailer and you'd go, fucking hell, that looks incredible. And you'd rewatch it. And now there's so much content that is being just fucking ejaculated into our eyes on a minute by minute basis that I think it's difficult to get excited about anything really anymore.
Yeah,
it's kind of like it's almost like it's gone back to, I've got an Odeon over the road and it's like, I'll walk past it and I'll go, what's on? And it'll be like, oh, Candyman, do you want to go and see Candyman? And so it's not like, I think at the moment it's almost like more like it was back then, because you kind of like just look and see what's on and then you go to the cinema if you go to the cinema. But maybe 10 years ago it would be, there are these kind of landmark films that you're there looking forward to. So back in 1989, no, there wasn't like a specific sequel I was looking forward to, but there were specific sequels that I loved. Yeah,
just to remind all the things, I remember trying to download the Phantom Menace trailer back in 1999 and 98 it was, and waiting hours for it and just replaying that over and over again on the computer. But
I mean, I remember I was too young for Return of the Jedi, and I was probably too young for Star Wars really. So I remember my sister coming back from Return of the Jedi with the sticker album, and then me sort of being obsessed with the toys and the Ewoks and all that stuff. And then I remember I went to see Cool Runnings specifically because I worked out in my head. Do you remember there used to be a show called Movies, Games and Videos?
I think so, yeah.
It was called Movies, and then it became more about movies, games, and videos, and so it became something else.
I don't think I'd thought about that for about 30 years. Like, that's just popped back into my head now you mentioned it.
It was on about like Saturday at 1:00, and I remember I used to watch that, and then I used to say to my dad, let's go to the cinema. And then on Saturday afternoon about 3:00, we'd go to like the shopping centre and we'd go to whatever film it was. I remember I specifically went to see Cool Runnings because I'd set in my head that because it was a comedy, it might have a trailer for Naked Gun 33 1/3 on it. And it did. And I went but I specifically went to see Cool Runnings because I wanted to see a trailer for Naked Gun 3. And I watched it, and it was a teaser trailer where there's a woman walking through a meadow and then she walks along a cliff, and it's like this romantic music's playing, and then Frank Drebin opens the door and it hits her in the face, and then she dies, and it's not in the film, but she falls off the cliff and she plummets to her death. And I just remember, and that's all you get, and it says Naked Gun 33 and a third, and I was like, oh my god. And then we watched Cool Runnings, and it was like, oh yeah, that's good too,
Yeah.
but that's not why we went, you know.
It was just for the trailer.
It was just for the trailer, but that's what you had to do in 1994 or 5 or whatever.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So we must be about quite similar age then, Nick. So I think I was 8 or 9 in 89 as well.
So we're 40.
So, yeah, I'm 40. Scary, isn't it?
No one gives a fuck about you. No one gives a fuck about you, Dave. We're 40. So yeah,
I'm nearly there.
Yeah, fuck off. We're in the 40. See, the thing is, right? If we make it cool, then Dave will be wishing his life away. And
I want those 4 years to absolutely zip past.
And I think there's no doubt in anyone's mind how cool we've made 40. Yeah,
big time. Big time.
Just by this chat we've had so far, everyone's envious of the lives that we've. Fucking hell, I want to be cool like that guy. Go to see Cool Runnings in 1994, see the Naked Gun 3 teaser trailer. Oh yeah, well, what a cool bunch of 40-year-old dudes. Yeah, we're 40. What of it?
It was a different life back then.
It was. I'm glad. If I wasn't this old, I wouldn't be old enough to know how shit today is. Do you know what I mean? We had it well good in the end. Yeah, welcome. We're all dying.
So you're talking like at 1989, like I think of 1999. That has been probably one of my favourite years of.
Yeah, all right, film. Dave. Wrap it in that you're younger. Yeah,
1999 is sort of like it's up there with 89 for like. So is it 82? Is a really good year where Wrath of Khan and Poltergeist came out, and then one of the Indiana Joneses came out maybe. Like 82 was a good year. 89 was a good year. 99 was an absolutely incredible year. That was my first year. I was just leaving for university. So the first half of the year, you had stuff like me and my school friends, as we were leaving school, we went to see The Phantom Menace. We went to see The Matrix.
Yeah.
You know, these were the films that we were seeing before we went away. And then when I started university, we were seeing films like Blair Witch Project, Fight Club, The Sixth Sense, American Beauty. You know, like 1999, if you just go through 1999, Election, like Rushmore, every film that came out in 1999 was basically, it was either a classic or it was made by Eyes Wide Shut. Like it was made by like this all-time, you know, Stanley Kubrick was making films. Can't remember if Spielberg had a film out that year, but it's like all of like these big hitters were bringing out these films in 1999. It was just like this incredible year for films. And I remember it so well because we had like a little independent cinema in Winchester. I've just come off another podcast, so I'm not like warming up. I'm like, I've hit the ground running. And
this is your podcast as far as we're concerned. You just talk.
I'm like a wind-up toy, and you just point me in the right direction. I'll do it. And but like, yeah, 1999. It was like we had this little independent cinema called The Screen in Winchester, and you could just go and see everything in there. And you know, I have such like a fond memory, not just of kind of like the individual films, but the clump of films that were out around the same time, and also the venue, like the cinema that I went to see them in. So it's all very sort of like, you know, I've never been into football. And I think like films and the whole, everything that sort of floats around films is kind of what I'm really passionate, what I love. And films is my football, you know, so.
Yeah.
I feel like that too. So I didn't go to university. I sort of bummed around. I didn't go to university until, I should say, I did go. I just didn't go to like 2003. So I didn't go in like that in 99. I just bummed around going to the cinema all the time and doing a crap job. And
what was your crap job?
I worked in Wicks in a DIY shop, just like selling people bricks and stuff and tidying up.
What do bricks make?
Well, I mean, it depends what you use them for, really.
They make houses. They make houses, Rich. Yeah?
This is true.
How shit is that job sounding now?
I mean, it was pretty shit. But I had a lot of fun.
Houses house families. Yeah.
They build memories.
And love and memories. And what do you leave when you go to the cinema? A house. Yeah. So I think you're being really hard on yourself about that Wix job, right?
I mean, to be honest, I mostly just went to McDonald's and got all the sauces, then lined them up in the warehouse and ran them over with a forklift truck to see which would go the furthest.
Fine, if you want to be a cunt about it, your life can sound as shit as you want to make it, mate. All right, I was trying to help you.
Yeah, I thought it sounded great.
I think that you've contributed to a lot of people's happy memories.
So do I.
Thank you for that.
Get him on. He'll talk about sequels, but he'll change your life.
Your best sequel ever. What is it?
It's not this, but I took a look at the stuff that other people have said,
Yeah.
and but I tell you what, this isn't. It's not the best sequel ever, right? But what I will say is, it is a much maligned movie, and I watched it last week, the week before, and I thought it was incredible. And I'd seen it before.
Should we say what it is?
Well, okay, so it's Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Now, right, so my relationship with Texas Chainsaw Massacre is that I think it's probably the best horror film ever made. I think it's definitely the scariest, and I'd known of it for many years. When I was a child, I was very timid and scared of horror movies. I grew up in London in the 80s, and all of the tube stations had Nightmare on Elm Street posters on them. So it wasn't like you'd even go into a video shop. It was like Freddy Krueger was on the walls, as you were being taken to school or to the museum or whatever it was. Freddy Krueger was all over the place because there was like a film that came out almost every year. And I found it absolutely terrifying. So I was a very squeamish child, and I got into horror through the Evil Dead franchise. And then that was sort of like my gateway into sort of like horror movies. And Texas Chainsaw Massacre was banned in England, and they had I can't remember what year it was either 97 or 98, and they had there was one cinema in Covent Garden called the ABC Cinema on Shaftesbury Avenue, which is now an Odeon, but it's still there, and they had a license to play Texas Chainsaw Massacre for like a limited period. And so I went with my mate who was in the year above. We went to see Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and it was one of those films where, because it was banned, there was sort of like this aura around it. And we were scared before we even went in, And so I was underage, so I must have been like 16 or 17. And when the lights go down, and it was an ABC cinema just before it got converted to an Odeon. So it was a bit of a flea pit. The carpet was all 70s, sort of like brown and orange and sticky. And it was sort of like a really sort of like fairly rundown cinema. And like medium-sized screen, and then the lights go down, and we're sat there, and then the opening crawl comes up, and it's got this voiceover which sort of like just goes straight through you, and there's the sound effect of like the flash bulbs going off. And I remember my friend turned around to me and he said, "Let's go." and then we got through it, but it felt like we'd survived it. And at the end, I was ready to leave at any point, and he said, "Yeah, me too." It's like we could have left, but we stuck it through. And I just think it's one of those films where by the end of it, I wrote my dissertation about these films because it was sort of like it came out in the early 70s, and it was a crossover time where the Vietnam War was going on, and there was all this news footage coming back of troops of dead bodies on the news, of people with like their guts spilling out on stretchers, and it was sort of like, and all of the people that were making horror films realized there was nothing that they could really do that was worse than what people were seeing every night on the news. And so it sort of bred this new wave of horror movie directors like Wes Craven and Tobe Hooper and John Carpenter, who sort of like made sort of like these fairly gritty, grimy horror movies. And Texas Chainsaw Massacre just has like this ambience to it and this texture to it, and it feels dirty and sweaty, and the movie feels hot. You're watching it, and it's in Texas in the summer, and it feels hot. And when you see all of like the rotting animal carcasses, you feel like you can smell them. It feels like it's like documentary real, and it's just this really sort of incredible film that I haven't seen too many times. I think that was probably the best scenario of watching a film, was that film. It was that cinema on that day at that time when it was still banned, and then it was sort of like on DVD a couple of years later. But when I went to university a couple of years after that, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 was still banned, and I'd never seen it. And there was a guy that used to have like a Laserdisc player, and he would pirate on VHS tapes all of his laser discs, and you'd have to meet him in the student union on a Saturday lunchtime when it was empty.
Yeah.
And you'd go in and you'd like give him some money, 20 quid or whatever, and he'd give you like a brown paper bag with a VHS in it. And you'd go home, and so I watched sort of like Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, Cannibal Holocaust, UK version of Army of Darkness. But so when I watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 for the first time, it was so grainy and fucking fucked up and fuzzy, and you couldn't really see what was, you couldn't make it out. But it made it better, because when you watched it, you were just like, this film is banned, and we've got a copy of it, and we're watching it. You couldn't really work it out. I haven't watched it loads, and then I watched it again recently. One of the things that's happened in between is that I've been much more aware. I've seen all of the sequels. They're all awful.
Yep.
For different reasons, None of them are as good as the original, and it's got one of the most confusing timelines that any franchise has ever had. Where they've got Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is a standalone film. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, which we'll get into, is a completely different genre.
Yeah.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, Leatherface, is not a sequel to either of the two previous films, really, and it's sort of like a standalone hero version of what Leatherface could be. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 4, starring Matthew McConaughey and Renée Zellweger, was called Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation, or something else, Return to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is essentially, it's a reboot, remake. And then it went into, you've got, if you know about this, correct me, but then you've got like the Michael Bay, Platinum Dunes, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Beginning.
Yeah.
And then you've got Texas Chainsaw. Then you've got Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3D.
3D.
Then you've got another one, which is a prequel. And now I'm lost, and I haven't seen all of the ones that they've made since Platinum Dunes. And they're all kind of like going, no, forget everything you've seen before. This is the real Texas, and it's shit again. And you're like, but like, there's one that's sort of like got cell phones, and they're all like texting and stuff, but it's meant to be set the day after the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 1973. So they haven't even done any kind of like, so it's just this mess. So there's people that say that Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 is shit, and you go, if you just take Texas Chainsaw Massacre alone as it is, as a standalone movie, and you take for granted that all of the sequels are awful and they get worse, and then you look at Texas Chainsaw Massacre and see it in its own light. One of the things that I noticed in between the first time I watched it and the most recent time I've seen it was that the poster that came out was piss take of The Breakfast Club.
Yeah, I noticed that today too.
So you've got like the whole of like the Sawyer family, who are cannibals from the first film, and they're all posing the cast of The Breakfast Club on the front cover, and so even the marketing is sort of like tongue in cheek. And so when I watched it the other week, what I noticed about Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 was, whereas you get Evil Dead, which was a straight horror movie, and then you got Evil Dead 2, which took it in a comedic, sort of more action-packed direction. That gets praised as kind of like, well, they took the original and they completely changed it. They switched genres and they made it into sort of a horror comedy. So the first one's a horror, second one's sort of a remake and a horror comedy. And that's one of the reasons why people love it. And the reasons why people hate Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 is they took the original and they made it into sort of like an action comedy. And that's one of the reasons why people hate it. And I think that if people stopped looking at it as if it was, a legitimate sequel to the original, and they looked at it like they look at Evil Dead 2 and just say, he didn't want to repeat himself. Tobe Hooper, I think it was part of his contract. He had like a 3-picture deal with Orion, and he'd made Life Force, and he'd made something else. It was the Invaders from Mars. And I think they said, you've got to do, part of that is you've got to do a sequel to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And he was like, I don't want to. So what I'll do is I'll do like this slapstick comedy type thing. And if you look at it it's fucking brilliant. The scenes in it that are, and I don't even think Evil Dead 2 does this. There is, or even American Werewolf in London, or maybe the only thing that does do it is American Werewolf in London. But there are scenes in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 that are simultaneously hilarious and terrifying. And for any film to be able to pull that off, I guess it's not my favorite sequel. That would probably be Empire Strikes Back, right? Which I think is better than the original, right?
Yeah.
But someone will say that, or someone else would have said that, and I'm using this as my opportunity to throw a bit of love towards Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, because I think it needs to be reevaluated.
Yeah.
I'm really glad you did that, because I'd never seen this film before, and I think I'm now a richer person for having watched it this morning.
So I sent you my list really late, and I apologise for that.
I know, that's all right. It just meant that I watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 at 9 o'clock in the morning, which is a weird experience, I think, for my neighbours listening to lots of screaming coming out of my house.
So while it's fresh in your mind, what did you make of it? What did you think?
So I have a thing where if you're going to make a sequel, you've got to make a sequel different or say something else.
Mm-hmm.
And I can really appreciate that it is very different to the original one. It's very, they did make that horror comedy. Horror is not particularly my genre, I don't think. I think a bit like you, maybe when you were a kid, I was a bit of a wussy kid as well, and I didn't like horror stuff either. And I probably carried that on into later life. but actually, I found it quite watchable. I think the script must have just been like 90 pages of someone going, ah!
Yeah.
But it was nice to get a bit of backstory into the family, and winning chili competitions by grinding up people.
Yeah,
There's
backstory to the family, and I like all that, and I think that turning the family from, like, there is dark comedy in the original, but what they've done is they've gone, right, we'll hook onto that and we'll make that, no pun intended, but we'll hook onto that and we'll make that thing that the engine behind this film, which is we'll put loads of sort of like jokes in it. I think Stretch is the main female protagonist. I think she's great. She does, in the second half later on, scream a lot, but I think they do so much character work with her in the first half that she doesn't just sort of like blend in to become another female final girl that's running around screaming, but you're kind of with her on that.
Yeah.
And the stuff they put her through is almost like a Bruce Campbell kind of level of torture, that they cut off her friend's face and make her wear it. There's that bit when she falls through the hole in the ground outside the fun fair, and she just keeps falling and falling and falling. And Dennis Hopper gets like this decomposed arm for her to hold on to stop her from falling through. Oh, Dennis Hopper's in it, by the way. He grabs hold of the arm, and then the arm breaks in half, and then she falls. So there's all this slapstick horror stuff that's happening to her, and it was made, if not before, at the same time as Evil Dead 2. So it wasn't like he saw what they were doing and then he did it himself. No. It was sort of like this was always what he was going to do. And like you said, by repeating sequels, if you look at something like Die Hard 2, I love Die Hard 2, but I never choose to watch Die Hard 2 because I've got Die Hard.
Yeah.
I'll either watch Die Hard 1 or I'll watch Die Hard 3, or I'll watch Die Hard 2 if it's on TV.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
that's a good life lesson.
But Die Hard 2 is just a repeat of the first one. And when you look at sequels, it's just kind of like, I think having something either totally different to it or taking those characters and doing something different with them, I think is kind of the way forward. And I mean, the same with Back to the Future 2, I think, but Back to the Future 2 is it's kind of like, I think there's a weird feeling coming out of Back to the Future 2 where you kind of like can't really work out what it is. And then years later you go, I think it was a real shame that they couldn't have worked things out with Crispin Glover. Because he's such a main part of the original, and then it's kind of like you're being gaslit a bit with the second one, like going, "Oh, he wasn't that important. It was all about Marty McFly, Doc, and his mum." And you're kind of like, "Yeah, but what happened to his?" So they kill his dad off, and it's kind of like, right, okay. But the whole film seems like it's like they're solving the problem of not having to work with Crispin Glover, when in actual fact, I wonder what that sequel would have been like. It could have been my dream sequel.
Yeah.
But yeah, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So the scene that I mean is the scene where she's in the radio
the radio station,
the radio station, and there's all the records, and Chop Top is you don't know who he is. He's wearing a Sonny Bono wig, and he's got the glasses, and he's dressed up as a hippie. And he's meant to be the brother of the hitchhiker in the first film, but he was away at the Vietnam War during the first film, and he got a metal plate put in his head.
Yeah.
So when he's there, he's sort of like crazy. And you've got Stretch, and she's in the thing, and her mate has left, and so she's on her own in the radio station, and then she comes out, and here is this weirdo that's in the radio station. He wants a tour, and so she gives him this super fast tour of the radio station. And every time she like picks up like, this is a snow globe, and he's going, yeah, snow globe, snow globe. And she's going through all of the stuff, and it's terrifying.
It is.
I find it terrifying, but it's also just really funny as well.
He's even making jokes when he's bashing the guy's brains in with a hammer.
Yeah.
I find Chop Top the most terrifying, actually. Not just because of what he is, but because of how he got made like that. I think about like that horrific injury that happened to him in Nam, where it must have blown half his head off.
Yeah.
And how that's twisted him up to then, the hitchhiker's his brother, and that's the corpse that he's carrying around with him and making talk, isn't it?
Wow.
And who makes it onto the poster, the Breakfast Club poster.
Yeah.
But the fact that he's got a coat hanger and he's heating it up with a lighter, and you don't know what he's doing with it, but he keeps scratching his head. And then when the wig comes off, it's kind of like you realise that he's using the coat hanger to scratch off bits of bits of dead skin that's like grown around his plate and his head, and he's eating it, and it's just absolutely gross. The thing that I find really weird about the franchise is that, and it happens with franchises, it happened with Nightmare on Elm Street, where they went, oh, Freddy Krueger does one-liners, so we'll make it all about Freddy Krueger's one-liners, and then he's not scary anymore. In fact, he's a hero. And what they did with Texas Chainsaw Massacre what was great about it was about a family. And what sort of ruined it was that they just obsessed with Leatherface as a character. And he's great as in the first one, he's sort of like the matriarch, or he's the brother, but they haven't got a woman in the family. And so he dresses up as a woman, and he's sort of like serving them food, and they're all sort of like a group of like unruly kids. And he's like this abused child who's got this elements cross-dress, and because it's based on the Ed Gein story, like Psycho was, and so you've got kind of like, he's not like this. The way that he's depicted later on is that he's kind of like, like a professional wrestler with a mask and a chainsaw.
Yeah.
When in actual fact, in that first film, he's wearing a mask with lipstick all over it. He's wearing kind of like a dress or an apron, and he's like, it's kind of like a pastiche of like the American Family, where he's being shouted at and he's waving his hands and he's sort of like screaming in like a high-pitched voice. And so in the sequel, it's interesting that Leatherface hasn't come up in our chat yet, because there's so many other elements to the film that are interesting that aren't Leatherface. He's great as an element. And then when the sequels all became about Leatherface, it's just sort of like, well, there's more to it than that.
Yeah. He's not even the most evil bit of the film, of the family, really, is he? He's not evil. Like the...
He's the most sympathetic. He is. You kind of want him to be saved, especially in the first one. In the second one, he becomes more of like a slapstick idiot. And I don't mind that at all. But he's not like this hulking beast that you're terrified of, except for the chainsaw. He's been taught from birth to do this, and that's all he knows. He's not evil. It's just he's surrounded by like an evil family that haven't brought him up right.
Yeah.
So when you get rid of the family later on in the third one, and then it just becomes like an excuse on how can we fit Leatherface in this, it sort of like becomes uninteresting. It would be a bit like doing a Jaws film, and it's just all about the shark, and it's great as an element.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I find the granddad the creepiest of the, like, almost the most evil bit of it is like they're all like they are because of him, basically, aren't they? He's the one who couldn't get over his abattoir kind of job. In
the first one, it's kind of like he is like the cherry on the cake of this ridiculous comedy that you don't realize is a comedy. You're watching this absolutely excruciatingly horrific, and it's mainly done with mood and tension, but like this horrific film that builds and builds and builds. There's no like act one, act two, act three. It's just from the beginning of the film, it escalates. And then the cherry on the cake is they bring out this corpse and he's alive. And it's this decrepit old man who isn't going to smack you over the head with a hammer and kill you. He's going to pick up the hammer and drop it because he's so decrepit hundreds of times, and that's what's going to kill you, is that slowly he'll cave your head in. But he's not going to do it in one go. And it's just like, oh my God, that's absolutely horrific. And so when he's back in the sequel, you're like, yeah, here he is. It's just weird how they've kind of like gone, well, we're not going to be able to do what the original did, so let's do something else. I was surprised with the time I saw it recently. This time was, in my head, it was kind of like a remake. It was like, instead of a house, it's a fun fair.
Yeah.
But in actual fact, the fun fair doesn't come into it until about maybe the last 40 minutes, half an hour. And the rest of the film is just completely different from the original. And I admire it for that.
Absolutely.
I admire it for Dennis Hopper.
Dennis Hopper is crazy.
Dennis Hopper in a cowboy hat, toting 2 chainsaws. It's fucking mental, and it's brilliant.
When he's testing them out and he keeps making eye contact with the guy that's selling them to him like it's the most normal thing in the world. And then when he goes out and he tries the chainsaws out on the wood, and it just slowly zooms into the guy that's selling them to him, and his reaction to it is just fucking crazy. It's like, have you ever seen Cabin Fever?
The original one?
Yeah.
A long time ago, yeah.
There's the bit with the kid and he starts doing kung fu, and they're outside the shop and the kid does kung fu, and it's this slow motion weird thing, and it's sort of like this really weird thing. And I don't really like Cabin Fever, and I'm not a fan of Eli Roth, but you watch that bit and you go, that's so weird. And then you watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 and you go, that's where we got it from. That's the bit. It's Dennis Hopper with these 2 chainsaws, and then this guy that's selling them just sort of like has just this. He starts like whooping him on, and you kind of like, going, wow, what is this? It's so weird. Like the bit where Stretch goes at Dennis in his motel, and for no reason whatsoever, they've decided to have kind of like football fans outside, and they're all going up and down the corridors drinking and throwing stuff. And that's a Toby Hooper cameo. He's like he throws something. He's the first one when Stretch walks past him. He's wearing a hat and he's got a beard, and he throws something towards the camera, and then he walks off. And every time they open the door, there are all of these people, and they're walking around with like props. They've got, one of them's like stealing like a potted plant from a room and stuff. And you just see these things that are going outside the room, and they're having this conversation about Dennis Hopper trying to find his niece and his nephew, and they're having like this serious conversation about this chainsaw family that are murdering people. And outside the back, for no reason, he's decided to just have like this beer festival that's going on, and every time the door opens you see like a little snippet of it, and you think, that's brilliant. He didn't have to do that. He didn't have to set it in a motel room. He didn't. You know what I mean? It's like you watch it and you just take it for granted, and then you go, he chose to do all of that stuff for some reason, and it just makes the film weirder and funnier.
It sort of just makes me want to never go to Texas.
Yeah, absolutely. Or never try the chili.
No, definitely never try the chili.
It's like everything about it is disgusting. Like even the trophy that they give him,
the trophy.
And then they fill it with chili, and it's got this chili dripping down, and it's disgusting. But then when you see him with the trophy and he's driving home in his big sort of like RV, and it's like the way that the shot is, it looks like it's from a sitcom. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like he's not even looking at the road. He's barely touching the wheel. He's driving down the road. He's talking on his like his transistor radio. He's got his chili encrusted trophy next to him. It's just this really funny shot, which I just think, it's easy to dismiss it as not being the same as the original, but I think actually if you embrace what's so different about it, it's a brilliant sequel. Because it leaves the first one completely untouched. And the first one was like a 70s exploitation film. And the second one is this excessive 80s movie that was made after several Friday the 13th, several Halloweens, several Nightmare on Elm Street. So he's sort of like just throwing his hat in the ring and going, oh, you're going all out. I'm going to finish with 2 guys with chainsaws having a chainsaw fight. It's kind of like this film in a fun fair. This film is fucking mental. I love it.
It is mental. It's great. I wasn't expecting how mental it was going to be.
I love that Dennis Hopper's character really takes fire with fire, literally. He's like, they've got chainsaws. I'm not going to shoot them. I'm going to get chainsaws too.
Yeah, it's great. And also, it's kind of like, while he's walking around the theme park, he's shouting. He's not creeping up on them. He's not creeping up. He's going around all the corridors going, ah! and then sawing all of the support beams.
Bring
in
it
half.
all down. Bring it all down.
And you're kind of like, well, you know for a fact that there's an innocent woman in there as well.
Yeah, you dropped her in there.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's just so, and I don't think it's very long, right? It's like an hour and a half.
Hour and 40.
Yeah.
You know, in and out. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like a really fun. I think the first one, what I would
It's
say,
not fun.
the first one is grueling.
Yeah,
And
it is. Yeah.
I think you save that in your back pocket for like special occasions, and when the timing is right. You know, I don't want to just sort of like walk in halfway through and it's on.
Yeah.
I want to sort of like, you know, it's got to be like Halloween. It's got to be like an occasion, and you don't want to just have it on like a shit TV or watch it on your laptop. You kind of want to see it at a screening, whereas the second one is like a fun night out at the movies. Do you know what I mean? And you can just throw that on and show it to your mates, and it's
It's a hidden treasure.
yeah, and people talk so much shit about the second one. It's kind of like I think it should get as much love as Evil Dead 2, really.
Agreed. Yeah, thank
Well,
you.
I
I think we
never
covered
even
that,
knew
didn't we? We covered that.
I never even knew it existed until yesterday. So I'm very glad. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Because I'm glad I watched it.
Oh, good. And I'm glad.
Tick it off.
I'm glad you don't think I'm a massive wanker for suggesting it. But
Not at all.
It's impossible. Do you know what I mean? It's an impossible thing. What's the best sequel?
I was saying to Dave before you got on that actually I really love doing this one because I've not seen any of your 3 films, and I really love it when I've not seen any of when I've not seen a film. I really love it. It's because I get a chance to watch them.
Yeah, we can't talk about The Dark Knight every week.
No.
It's so nice to have someone pick other films.
It is a really good. I mean, Dark Knight's a great sequel, but for me, it's like it's a sequel in a universe that I don't particularly love.
Okay.
Like Christopher Nolan has made a trilogy of movies about Batman that seem to be embarrassed that they're making films about Batman.
Yeah, I get that.
And you kind of like go, yeah, cool. We'll give it to someone else. We've seen Christopher Nolan's version. Give it to someone else and let's see what they do. And it might be Joel Schumacher, or it might be, Zack Snyder. And it might not be better, but I think Batman has enough sort of like scope to do different things with it.
Yeah, great.
And I felt like 10 years of Christopher Nolan was like, yeah, I get it now. Let's for like 1.5 amazing films out of 3. You kind of like go, yeah, we get it. It's great.
What is the sequel you've most been disappointed with? So the first one was brilliant and you built up a lot in your head and then you came out and you thought, so not rubbish, but disappointed.
Well, I would say The Dark Knight Rises is... I thought Batman Begins was brilliant. I really did like The Dark Knight, but it's so long. It's sort of like, for me, I know people watch it over and over again, but for me, if it's really long, then it sort of like lacks that rewatchability for me, where you got to set the time aside. That's the problem with the Zack Snyder Justice League as well. I thought that was great, but I also think, when am I going to watch that again?
Yeah, exactly. He's got 5 hours to rewatch that.
I still haven't watched it yet.
It's brilliant. It's so good, and it's like mind blowing how different it is from the Joss Whedon version. And it's so. I just thought it was fantastic, but as you're watching it, you go, it's great, but 4 hours, you know. And one of my favorite films is Dancing with Wolves, but it's like, how many times have I seen that? 4 times, because it's like, when there's no rewatchability. Yeah, another terrible sequel would be Naked Gun 33 1/3, where the first one was great, second one was almost as good, and then the third one,
especially after you saw the trailer,
especially after I made all that effort for the trailer, the third one is kind of like goes towards what spoofs became, where the first 2 were like legitimate detective stories that had Leslie Nielsen in them. Like this, they work as a detective story, and then they're spoofing it as a genre. So it's not like here is a specific spoof, but it's like they're spoofing it as a genre. And then with the third one, they are taking stuff like Thelma and Louise. Here's a spoof of Thelma and Louise. Here's a spoof of The Great Escape. Here's a spoof of The Untouchables. And it's like, yeah. But they're specific moments out of films. And you kind of like go, oh, right, well, it's almost a different style from what the first 2 were like. And it's sort of like, it was a disappointing one. And then also, I think Terminator 3 is one of the worst films I've ever seen. I think it's offensively bad. And I went to see it with people that gave it a free pass. And I thought, I just remember when it came out on DVD, on the back, it said featuring that classic Terminator comedy. And What's great about the first one is that it's a cyberpunk, low budget slasher movie about a robot from the future that's killing people called Sarah Connor. It's a low budget, little, one and done, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't need a sequel. It's brilliant, right? And it's sort of like a science fiction version on Halloween. And then you got Terminator 2, which is so different from the original, but it's written and directed by the same guy. In the same way that Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 is different from the original, Terminator 2 is so different from the original. But you watch it again and you cannot get completely invested in that film. It's such a thrill ride. And then when you get to the third film, you can do anything. You've got a time machine. Send him back to the old west. Send him millions of years in the future. You do so. Can you imagine like Arnold Schwarzenegger sitting on a horse, and then the horse collapsing, and it's like, or go back to the fact that it's kind of like it's a chase film. Maybe reverse it. This time you're hunting the Terminator, and there's a Terminator that's on. You could do anything with it, right? Your big spin on Terminator 3 is we'll do Terminator 2, but one of them's a girl, right? And it's just like, it's so shit. It's kind of like, well, how's he going to get his leather jacket this time? Oh, he'll get it from a ladies' night at a strip club. Oh, brilliant. Ha, 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 ha. He's got Elton John sunglasses. Ha, 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 ha. He arrives in a massive disco ball. Ha, 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 ha. He says, talk to the hand. It's so shit. There's a bit in it where the TX, and I've only seen it like 1.5 times. I hate it. Saw it at the cinema. I hate it so much, right? There's a bit where there's a TX, which is the female Terminator, and she's got a robot endoskeleton, and she's covered in liquid metal, right? And so she can look like anything as long as it's got 2 legs and 2 arms, right? And so it's shitter than the T-1000 for a start, right? Because it's got a structure to it, so it can't become anything, but it can control everything through the internet. And there's a bit where she dips her finger in a pool of blood and she licks it, right? And for the audience, you're meant to go, oh, she's licking blood. But we know she's a robot, and we know that her whole exterior is liquid metal. So if she's touched it, she can do a DNA test on it. She doesn't need to put it in her mouth because the whole of her outside body is liquid metal. So she could just put her foot in it, and it would do a reading of the... Do you know what I mean? So her putting her finger in it and licking it is only for the audience's benefit. It's so absolutely shit. The only thing that anyone ever says to defend it is the ending's good, isn't it? You go, yeah, the ending's great. Why don't you put that at the beginning of your fucking film and then make the rest of the film how you're dealing with that? Maybe there's a time machine in the bunker, and maybe that's how things get started. And the other thing, the reboot of Friday the 13th is a really weird film where they do basically a cold opening that lasts half an hour.
All right.
They basically do an entire Friday the 13th movie in half an hour where you're following these kids and you think they're the main characters, and then they all get killed off by Jason. Maybe it's more like 20 minutes. And then at the end of this sequence where they all get picked off one by one and killed and hacked up by Jason, then it says Friday the 13th, and you go, oh my God, the film hasn't even started. And I think that was quite a good idea. It's Platinum Tunes again. And one of the great ideas about Friday the 13th remake is that because Friday the 13th is such a long story and you think you know it, but actually it's the mum in the first one, and then he doesn't get the hockey mask till the third one. What they've done is they've crunched everything into one, and they've done a greatest hits and go, this is everything you think you know about Friday the 13th in one condensed film. And you go, that's a great idea. But they open the film with, this is a Friday the 13th film in 15 minutes. Great. And then they go and do the same thing again, only over an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And you go, well, you've just shown that you can do it in 15 minutes. But now we're watching a slower version of what we've just watched take place over a feature-length running time. And you go, that was your opportunity to go, now we're going to do something different with the franchise. We've shown you what the franchise is. Now we can do something different. I think that was a wasted opportunity, but it's not one of the worst sequels. One of the worst sequels is obviously Star Trek 3, Star Trek 5, one of the Star Treks.
Any odd number Star Trek.
The Last Jedi. I'd say The Last Jedi is
disappointing, or
it was one of those weird experiences. I didn't read any reviews going in. I went in at a very early screening, one of the first screenings in London. We got up at like 3 o'clock in the morning for like a 5 o'clock
Wow.
in the morning screening, and we all sat down.
That
There
just
was
makes it worse.
there was 10 of us. I was still drunk from the night before, and there was 10 of us in there, and we were all sat there, and I really loved The Force Awakens because it's very similar to elements of the other films, but you sort of needed it as a palate cleanser to get you excited again for Star Wars. So what I loved about The Force Awakens was I came out of it and I was excited about Star Wars again, because the prequels killed it, for me.
Yeah.
The Revenge of the Sith, I left Revenge of the Sith, and thank George, I have to spend another penny on Star Wars ever again, right? You've absolutely killed it. And The Force Awakens did something amazing, which it got me interested in Star Wars again. And not just I loved it twice as much as I ever did. And then The Last Jedi, I just remember something weird happening where even when the opening crawl came up, I hated it. And I was just spent the whole film, I hated it. And every 10 minutes there was a terrible joke. And I was like, I hate this. But I was watching it with 10 people and we all came out of it and we were all really sort of like quiet. No one wanted to be the first to say they liked it,
Yeah.
And I was just like, everybody loved it. And I'm the cunt. Nobody, I'm the only one that didn't like it. I'm the only one that didn't like it out of us 10. And then one by one, everyone said that they didn't like it. And it was
I hated it. I really, really hated it. I think a lot of people actually liked Last Jedi, and Dave, you liked Last Jedi, didn't you? I really hated it.
Sorry.
I actually think Rise of Skywalker, which loads of people hate, is better than Last Jedi.
I think that Rise of Skywalker is this. Do you know what? I think The Last Jedi I don't even think it's The Last Jedi's fault. I'm sort of like, I think what Rian Johnson did, I think he did it badly. I think the jokes, all of them for me, just fall flat.
Yeah.
And it's almost like Terminator 3, the classic Terminator humor. And you go, Arnold Schwarzenegger putting on star-shaped sunglasses, Elton John sunglasses, is not classic Terminator humor. There is incidental humor in the Terminator films, but they're not going out of their way to make a gag, right? Like it's a Naked Gun movie. Whereas Star Wars has incidental humor. The bit in the original, when Han Solo's blasted all of like the intercoms and they're saying, "Is everything right?" You go, "Yeah, we're all fine. Everything's fine here. We're all fine. How are you?" And then he, a boring conversation anyway. That's like a funny bit. But you don't feel like it's there purely for the audience's benefit. You feel like that's an incidental thing that's happening in that universe. Whereas The Last Jedi, just every time there's a joke, everything screeches to a halt. And they do this joke, which sort of falls flat. And then they've got to sort of like build up the energy. I didn't mind the story. I just thought the tone was wrong. And I also thought that there's a way of treating old characters where they don't have to eclipse the new characters that you've created, but they sort of like, they're there to sort of like send them on their way. And I think that if you look at a film like Creed, where you've got Rocky, who's old and he's ill and he's looking after this new character, you come to love Creed, but Rocky's there and Rocky doesn't overshadow him, but he's there and he's helping him along. And I think that's how you should deal with those characters, not like go through them like a tick list, killing them off one by one because you can't be bothered to do anything with them. And I think they should have just had them all in the first one and then got it out of the way. Like opening shot, you have Han, Luke, and Leia, and they go, "Oh no, we're living in this utopian paradise." But it turns out we're the arseholes.
Yeah.
They're in power, they're the arseholes, and there are people, there's resistant fighters that are trying to. And then the end of the film, surely, is that everyone works out a way that they can coexist and survive. That's the end of the trilogy. So I don't think it's that The Rise of Skywalker was better than The Last Jedi. I just think that they're all pointless once you get past the fact that they didn't plan 3 films in a row.
No.
You kind of like go,
Yeah, that's the problem.
You didn't have a plan.
Yeah.
And so you go, there's no point in.
It's not a trilogy if you don't plan it as 3 films.
It's like The Rise of Skywalker exists, but you don't ever have to watch it ever again. You don't have to watch The Force Awakens because they say, that's a great question for another time, which we'll never answer in the 3 films. You never answer it. It's just like, the guy that wrote that came back and wrote the 3rd one and he still didn't answer it. So you kind of like, just like go, just Joe, you can just and I think it's all right. I think it's absolutely all right to just say there are 3 Star Wars films and I love them.
Yeah, perfect.
Ewok's Adventure, Battle for Endor,
Caravan of Love. whatever it's
Caravan of
called.
Courage,
There we
and
go.
the Star Wars Holiday Special. What a trilogy! They're great. They're great.
So you've mentioned a lot of sequels you hated there. What was your pick for worst sequel of all time? Which might not be your worst sequel of all time.
No, I think The Last Jedi, on a person, I know people love it, but I don't understand that thought process. I think it looks good, and there's loads of technical things that are good about The Last Jedi. But the worst sequel of all time, though, of course, is Weekend at Bernie's 2. It's not that Weekend at Bernie's is the best film ever made, but for what it is, Weekend at Bernie's is an enjoyable film, right? If you know what you're going into, Weekend at Bernie's is great. And also, Terry Kaiser is the guy that plays Bernie, who I think looks like Robert Downey Jr.
He does a bit, yeah. Yeah, I can see that.
So last year I was watching them, and I was tweeting about how Robert Downey Jr. is great in these Bernie's movies. like these prequels to the Avengers movies are fantastic. Yeah, I think Weekend at Bernie's is a really sort of like disposable, enjoyable film. I don't think anything more of it. That's all it is. It's nice to see Andrew McCarthy doing something outside of the Brat Pack. And it's kind of like, if you like Mannequin, my sister loved Mannequin when we were growing up. Mannequin on the Move is a terrible sequel. But if you liked Mannequin growing up and you wanted some more Andrew McCarthy action, then Weekend at Bernie's was the way to go. Yeah. Weekend at Bernie's 2 sort of takes that premise, overcomplicates it, adds voodoo into it, and then it puts them in sort of like this holiday resort, and the film feels like they said, like, there's so many sort of semi-improvised scenes that are set in their hotel room around their minibar.
Yeah.
And you kind of like go, this looks cheap. It looks like you've all gone on holiday, and while you're on holiday, and you've all gone on holiday, all expenses paid, you're being paid, and you've got to commit to like 3 hours every morning towards making Weekend at Bernie's 2.
Yeah.
And it just looked, the fact that they've got people in it that have so much screen time that weren't in the original makes me feel like, rather than story-wise, that feels like it's some sort of, it feels like a tax dodge, or it feels like no one was really committed to. Everyone knows that Weekend at Bernie's is a piece of shit. It's a punchline. So let's just use this as an excuse to get money out of it, to get a holiday out of it. And can you write me as little involvement in this as possible, so I can just show up for a couple of hours here and there, and then the rest of it will be done by these like.
It's just not funny. It's just not. It's
fucking
boring.
So dull.
It's boring. It's got like, what's funny about Weekend at Bernie's is a dead body looking like it's alive.
Yeah.
That's the joke. We've got this guy, not only are we trying to pretend that he's alive, but he kind of like ends up, he's a dead body, but he ends up in situations that looks like he's alive. And he can, there's one point in the original where he's in a fist fight with someone, and it's just because the other guy is moving that he's moving. And if the guy stopped moving, he'd realize he was a dead body. In the second one, he's got this voodoo curse on him, so he moves on his own accord. And it's just like, that's not what is good about the first film. How do the makers of Weekend at Bernie's 2 not know what is good about Weekend at Bernie's 1?
I don't know.
I'd never seen Weekend at Bernie's, so
Haven't
you're telling
you?
me that. No.
Oh,
so I was really
dang.
confused at 6:30 this morning when I put it on. So there's no voodoo, and he doesn't move at all.
No,
In the
he
first
doesn't
one.
move at all. He's just dead in the first one.
It's like they found out the actor could do physical comedy, and they thought
The physical
there
comedy
we
is
go.
like Terry Kaiser's physical comedy is quite good. I have to say that's the only thing good about this film.
In the first one, his facial expressions and his physical comedy is brilliant. In the second one, he's like dancing and he's doing the thing. And the physical comedy, no, I'd say the physical performance
There we go.
is outstanding.
Yeah.
But what
Sorry.
they've got him to do is rubbish.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, it's great, but look what you're using it for. It's so shit. I mean, Bernie's is so shit, and it's shit as a film. As a standalone film, it's shit. It looks cheap. It looks lazy. It looks illegal. It looks like the money isn't going into the film, but it's going on the all-you-can-eat buffets.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like they've siphoned off so much of the cash.
That suitcase of $3 million really is the $3 million they've nicked out
Is
the
that in
budget.
the first one? Is that money from the first one? They're still finding.
The money is, it's been siphoned off by Bernie in the first one.
Okay,
which is why he gets killed.
cool.
But it doesn't matter. But the fact is, the first one isn't a great film, right? But it is a disposable, lightweight comedy about people trying to pretend that a dead body is alive, right? Fine. Yeah. Okay. If you'd have told me it was a remake of a French movie, I'd be like, yeah, that explains everything, right? Fine. That's Weekend at Bernie's. The fact that doing a sequel 4 year later, where you go, well, surely he'd have, like, the first one wasn't a cartoon. The second one is a cartoon.
Yeah.
And I think it even starts with the cartoon.
It starts with the cartoon, yeah. I was messaging Dave last night when I was watching it and saying, even the opening credits are rubbish.
It's like it's got such a low watermark, a low benchmark to reach. Do you know what I mean? It's like, all we have to do, guys, don't worry, guys, this is going to be a slam dunk. All we've got to do is be as good as Weekend at Bernie's. and we can, and we've done it. And it's like, the reason why it's such a bad sequel is that it can't even be as good as Weekend at Bernie's, right? It's sort of like, there's like, it's set like, I mean, they made it 4 years later. So in your head, you're like going, I think the original was 89, right? And the next one was like 93 or 94. And you kind
it's
of like
93, yeah.
You go, that's the same year as Jurassic Park. Do you know what I mean? It's the same year as Demolition Man. There was other stuff that was happening. And you kind of like go, what? It's kind of like, he would have rotten by that much. Why 4 years after the original Weekend at Bernie's has someone had the fucking brainwave to do a sequel to Weekend at Bernie's? Unless it is to have a fucking all expenses paid luxury Caribbean holiday, which
Must
is
be.
what it is. You look at it and you go,
it's got to be.
it's not disappointing and franchise breaking like Terminator or Star Wars. It's just sort of like, it was such an easy win and you've just failed, and it's like, what a waste of your time, my time, everyone involved. It's just shit. I'm sure they had a lovely holiday, but you just look at it and you just go, what a fucking piece of fucking filth. Fucking awful. Yeah.
Apparently they tried to make a third one a few years ago as well.
Yeah.
IMDb
trying to make a third one, yeah.
If they're going to leave it this long, I think that they would. I don't think that it would be. I think it would probably be an improvement.
It couldn't be any worse than that.
it might even be the best one. Do you know what I mean? They might have learned so much. There might have been a sense of irony to it. It would have cut through it, you know, and they'd have gone, yeah, I think actually we can do a sequel here with Weekend at Bernie's, or a remake, or do something. But the second one, it's like they've strayed from the formula and paid the price.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be like, when you first said it, in my head, like Animal House, Porky's 2, a little bit risque. Watching it as a young boy, I think, oh, there's a bit of boob. But there wasn't even that. I know I'm a grown man now.
But... wasn't even a bit of boob. And I'm a grown man with an internet connection. That's still the only thing that I look for in a movie is Weekend at Bernie's. Does sound like it's like this raunchy sort of sex comedy, right?
All my entire life, I thought that's what Weekend at Bernie's was.
I think there's a bit more of it in the first one. There's a scene where a woman goes upstairs, has an argument with Bernie, and then comes back down because she's just had sex with him.
Oh my God.
And that's like a great moment. Because it's almost a kid's film, except for every so often there's a swear word and there's a sex scene.
Yeah.
And when it's edited for TV, it's kind of like, has she just had sex with a dead man? And no one's going to tell her, and she'd be traumatized, right? I think there's stuff. I enjoy the first one for exactly what it is.
Yeah. Did you watch them recently, or is it something you watched back in the early to late 90s?
My sister, as I said, was an Andrew McCarthy fan, so Weekend at Bernie's 1 at the time. Weekend at Bernie's 2, I think, came straight to video. Weekend at Bernie's feels it was on like a cycle of Saturday evening movie slots, like Three Amigos, Police Academy movies, or, you know, either on ITV or BBC One. You'd get like a movie that started about 5 o'clock on a Saturday.
Yeah.
And Weekend at Bernie's was edited for TV to be one of those. Weekend at Bernie's 2 sort of came out a lot later, and then it sort of felt like it was straight to video. And so it just appeared in like video shops, and you kind of like go, oh, maybe I'll avoid that. And then eventually, I think I watched it maybe in the mid-90s, and then I hadn't seen it again till last year. I think it's free on YouTube. You can see it. Is that where you saw it?
That's how we watched it.
Yeah.
And Chainsaw Massacre, by the way.
Oh, really? Well, the first the first Weekend at Bernie's I saw last year on YouTube, which was heavily edited. So they'll even take out, like, there's a kid that gives him the finger at one point. They cut that scene out, and they cut out all the swearing, and it gets to a point where things actually don't really make sense when you watch the edited version of the first one. And then when you get to the second one, I watched that on YouTube, and I just couldn't believe how awful it was. Maybe I'm expecting too much from Weekend at Bernie's too.
Yeah.
Maybe. It's a great pick. It was shit.
It's awful, isn't it?
Awful.
Yeah, it was
It's
bad.
so bad. And there's just no excuse for a Hollywood-made movie that cost millions and millions of dollars to be that boring. Like, it's just no excuse. There wasn't a single joke in it that landed that I can think of.
None of it lands. And you've got Barry Bostwick in it, who is good when he's used correctly, and he's just sort of like this charisma-free kind of.
He just walks around, doesn't he? That's all.
Well, I mean, we spent more effort talking about Weekend at Bernie's than the people did that made it.
Yeah.
It's so shit. It's not even so bad it's good, or like entertaining by accident, which is incredible, right? To make a comedy about pretending a dead man's still alive and it not being even entertaining by accident.
No, it's rubbish.
You've spoken about your disappointing sequels and your worst sequel. What is the sequel that's surprised you the most that you liked it?
Oh,
so you got dragged to see it because the first one's rubbish, and you come out and thought that was great.
I'm not really sure. It's a really good question. I mean, what I would say is I'm not a massive fan of a lot of the Star Trek films, but some of the Star Trek films are some of my favourite films.
Yeah.
And some of them, it's like Star Trek 1, not that I hate it or anything like that. It's like I've seen it, I never need to see it again. I'm not even a massive fan of Star Trek 2. Star Trek 3, fine. I'll watch it I would have watched it if it was on TV on a Saturday night. But Star Trek 4, I love it. Star Trek 5, nothing. I don't even think I've seen Star Trek 5. Star Trek 6, Undiscovered Country, one of the best films, really? One of the best, most entertaining. But Christopher Plummer's in it. I watched it again because Christopher Plummer was in it, and he died last year. But Christopher Plummer is incredible in it. He's old friends with William Shatner in real life, and so you've got kind of like this sparring on camera, on film of those two, and it's just a really good, tense. It's sort of like The Hunt for Red October. It's like this really tense sort of Cold War era, end of the Cold War, 1980s, 1990s thriller, but set in the Star Trek universe. And it came after Star Trek 2, 3, and 4. They're sort of like a trilogy within a franchise. And then Star Trek 5 didn't do very well. And so Star Trek 6 was sort of like, let's just do one more. Let's hope it's good, but we'll do one more outing for the original crew, and then we'll call it a day. And they do it, and they really go out on a high. And I think that, you could almost take and leave all of the other films. I love Star Trek 4 because it's about, I saw it, I think it's one of the only ones that I saw at the cinema. I remember my mum took me when I was like 5 or 6, and I loved it. And in a way that I've never got into the TV show, and it's really only just Star Trek 4 and Star Trek 6 that I love. Yeah, I think they're kind of like surprising films. Yeah, but I don't know. And I think what's spectacular about the Rocky franchise is that there are some that are better than others. But the fact that 7 films in, what do? They did 5 Rockies, 6 Rockies.
6 Rockies, 2 Creeds.
2 Creeds. So they're 8 films in, and none of them are drop below a 3-star movie. So between 3 and 5. And you can argue over which ones are better and which one's your favorite. Some people love 3. I think that really 4 is what you needed. I think 1 and 2 are perfect. 3 is kind of like same again. You need something new. And then 4 comes along and it's like, yeah, great. I think 3 is the one which is most like Sylvester Stallone rather than Rocky.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like he's playing a character anymore. It feels like it's sort of like an autobiography at that point. And then when you go back into 4, it's kind of like, it's so lean and I can't wait for, he's recutting it at the moment.
Yeah, I can't wait.
I can't wait for that. And What I like about 4 is that it's really lean. It's to the point. He's got his heart on his sleeve. He genuinely thinks that, you know, if we all try really hard, we can all get along. And he can personally, with Rocky 4, end the Cold War. And you go, it's optimistic. And he's not this cynical kind of. He's not like this cynical sort of filmmaker that's just cranking stuff out because he wants to make money. It feels like Sylvester Stallone uses Rocky as a way to express how he really feels. And when he made Rocky 4, it's kind of like it's really excessive and it's overblown and it's over the top. But it's just this, when you boil it down, that speech that he does at the end, he means it. And if you have to sit through 90 minutes just to get to that bit, you kind of like go, it's a guy at the peak of his powers, at the peak of his creative freedom, that's decided to make an optimistic, hopeful movie about the world. And you go, fucking hell, hats off to you. And then the fact is, it's a film that's like 80% music montages.
Yeah.
And you go, I love it. I love it. It's got Dolph Lundgren in it. I love it. I would say Rocky 4, there's no reason why Rocky 4 should be good, and it is. Yeah. And then I even like Rocky 5, and then Rocky 6 I think might be the best one out of all of them. And I like Creed, and I like Creed 2 a bit, but I never loved Creed as a character as much as I loved Rocky.
I've only seen Rocky and Rocky 4. I've never seen any of the others, so I'm going to have to go back and watch them all now.
But what I'd say is, it's like they're all good, and they're the sort of films that you think you won't like because they're boxing movies, but they're not. Like, they're romantic comedies. Like the first two are romantic comedies about a boxer, and then it becomes more about boxing. But and I think he lost sight, and he was just like, right, I'm going to be. It's all about how big my muscles will get. Now I'm in direct competition with Schwarzenegger, so I'm going to go. But I think that as a franchise, they're all good. You look at Police Academy. You know, they made almost as many films with Police Academy, and they get shit. You know, and you look at the Halloween films; they're so all over the place. You look at the Friday, any franchise that goes beyond 3 films is in even Star Wars. You know, all of that. They made 2.5 good ones, and then they get really ropey with the prequels, and then they get almost unwatchable for me with the sequels. But I love Star Wars. But with Rocky, there's barely a single. I don't think there's any bad ones. And some of them, when you get to Rocky 6, you know, Rocky Balboa, some of them are as good as the franchise get.
I totally agree with you.
Maybe that's my answer.
No, it's a great answer. I love it. I get really excited when people want to talk about Rocky because it's like my favorite franchise.
It's such a personal franchise. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like it's autobiographical to him, and people thought that he'd be a complete laughingstock when he made the 6th one. And that's what the film's about. It's about a guy that's trying to go back into boxing, and everyone telling him they're all going to laugh at you. It's going to be pathetic. And it's sort of like he's writing, you know, it's the film that is also its own making of, you know. It's sort of like you can watch that and you can go, yeah, and that's what he went through making Rocky 6. And they're just like, when you're dealing with blockbusters and movie stars, to get a guy that got Oscar nominated twice for the same performance 40 years apart is unheard of, and it happened. And it's Stallone of all people.
Yeah.
He's incredible. Yeah,
he is incredible. What is your dream sequel?
So my dream sequel would have been a 1990s Evil Dead 4. Army of Darkness was, I've done other podcasts about Army of Darkness. I think Army of Darkness may not be my favorite film of all time anymore, but I've certainly seen it the most, and it's a film that was my favorite film for a very long time. And I don't know what it would be. Maybe Royal Tenenbaums sort of like clipped it when I first saw that, but I don't know what it would be anymore. I mean, it's always very difficult to choose a film, you know, when there's so many films. And my girlfriend says, well, what do you want to watch tonight? And I say, I want to see the best film ever made. And she says, and what is it? And I say, I don't know. I haven't seen it yet.
Oh,
and
nice.
that's how I approach. Yeah, because it's a fucking bullshit answer. But also, but also it's an optimistic answer, because I think that there is an incredible film out there. I watched this French film recently called Le Grand Bouffe, right?
Right.
which is a film about, it was made in the 70s. It's this disgusting film about, is it three? I think there's three French friends, three Frenchmen who go to a chateau for a weekend, and they decide that they're going to eat themselves to death, right? And so they just make, and I'm not even sure if that is, if they even say that up front, right? But what they say is they go to this thing, and like in every scene they're just eating, and they're cooking and they're eating and they're making this beautiful food, and they're sitting down and they're just eating, and then over the course of the film they just get fatter and their clothes don't fit, and they're like puking up and they're shitting themselves and they're farting, and there's sort of like this French prostitute that comes and joins them, and they're all like eating, and there's sort of like this orgy, and there's just food, and the toilets overflow, and it's just like, it's just this disgusting, but it was incredible. And you go, that is what I'm looking for in a movie, in terms of, I want to see something that my life is different after I've seen it to when it was when I started it.
If you hadn't told me that film was French, I would have guessed.
You would have guessed. But honest, find it. It's brilliant, right? It's sort of like, it's a slow burn, but as it gets going, it's really funny. It's really dark, and it's brilliant. And also at the time, it's got these three leads in it, and at the time, one of them's Italian, one of them's French, one of them's, I don't know, another French guy, I don't know. But it had, one of the guys is from La Cage aux Folles, which was what The Birdcage was based on.
Okay.
And that was like this huge French comedy about these two gay guys that own a nightclub. And then they made it into The Birdcage. But that was one of the biggest hits at the time. So you've got these three guys in this movie, and they're all basically the French Robert Redford. You know, they're these huge movie stars that we haven't heard of because we're English and ignorant, right? Yeah. But they're these huge movie stars, European movie stars, that were the biggest that they get in their country, and they're all doing a film where they shit themselves to death, right? It's like Paul Newman, Robert Redford, and Al Pacino have got together in the 70s, and they've made a film where they eat until they shit, right? It's brilliant, right? Anyway, so when I was 12, I had a ticket to see Beauty and the Beast on ice, right? I loved Beauty and the Beast as a movie, as a cartoon, as a Disney film, as a musical. I think Beauty and the Beast is a stunning piece of filmmaking. I loved it. I was a child. I loved Beauty and the Beast, right? And it was half term. And what do we do with the kids? Well, we're going to take them to Wembley. And we're going to watch Beauty and the Beast on ice. That's in the evening. How do we fill the day? So we went to the video shop, and I rented out Army of Darkness. And on the film, on the front cover, it said, "Trapped in time, surrounded by evil, low on gas." And I thought, that sounds sort of tongue-in-cheek, sort of ironic. I like the tagline to that. I think I'm going to like this movie. And on the front was this muscle-bound guy with a chainsaw for an arm. And I thought, great, rented it out. I watched that film. And when I started the film, I was a child looking forward to watching Beauty and the Beast on ice. And by the end of the film, which is weird, I've got, I don't know if you can see, the little chip cup that I got from the day that I went to see Beauty and the Beast on ice.
Amazing.
That's like 25 years old, however long.
Oh, amazing.
So it's like, well, what are we going to do? So we're going to go and see Beauty and the Beast on ice. I was a child, and then I watched Army of Darkness, and by the end of it, I was a man. And I realized that, like when you grow up, your taste of music is your parents' taste of music until I like the Beach Boys, I like the Beatles, I like Bob Dylan, right? And then you listen to your own stuff, and I found like Alice Cooper, and you go, that's what I like, that's mine. I still like the Beatles, but my thing is Alice Cooper. And it was like, what do I like? And that was the moment I was like, Army of Darkness, fucking hell. I didn't know it was a sequel. I'd heard of Evil Dead, but I didn't know about it. I think I first found out about Army of Darkness in Flicks magazine, where it was called Medieval Dead, Army of Darkness, or it was Evil Dead 4, Medieval Dead, or something like that. Yeah. Which is, I think Medieval Dead's a better title.
Yeah, that's a great
That is
title.
good.
Why did they
It's
call it that?
And I think because the other two weren't made by Universal, Man
Right.
with Universal. Sam Raimi had made Darkman with Universal, and then Universal said, "Whoa, we'll make another film with you, but we'll kind of frame it like it's its own thing. You'll know it's a sequel, but it's its own standalone sort of thing." And I watched it, and I became obsessed with it. I rented it out every weekend. I was like 11. Or maybe I was 12, and it was a 15 at the video shop, and the guy knew I wasn't 15, but I rented it. But he knew that my mum and me had rented it out so many times that he was just like, just have it, and I'd just go in and I'd get it every week and I'd watch it. And I watched it so many times that my mum bought it for me as a gift, without me even asking for it. Like, I don't know how. I'll go to the video shop, I'll get a video, I'll put it in the video machine, I'll sit cross-legged in front of the TV, I'll watch a video, I'll rewind it, I'll watch it again, I'll take it back. I don't know how aware my mum was, but I must have done it enough to the point that my mum would have just bought it for me and just thought it's cheaper to spend 15 quid on it than it is to just rent it out for £2.50 every week. I watched that until it ran, until the tape wore out, and then I had to buy another version of it. I bought it in a box set, which was a 4-front box set. 4-front used lower quality videotape. So if you watched it 4 times, it would start decreasing in quality after that. And so I wore that out. Then I went to university. I bought a pirate copy of the same guy I bought Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 from. Watched that until that wore out. I mean, the reason I bought a pirate copy is there's different versions of Army of Darkness. There's an American release, there's a UK release, and there's a director's cut. Then there's an Australian TV release, and then there's like loads of others. The best version for me is the UK cut because it has the post-apocalyptic ending, and there's a different edit and a different rhythm to it. So the battle sequence is edited completely differently, and it's got a better rhythm to it. And it sounds like you're being nitpicky until you watch it and you go, oh, it doesn't make sense like this. It makes sense on the UK cut, but it makes sense on the American cut because they're trying to make it an 80-minute movie when in actual fact it's about, I think the American cut is 82 minutes and the UK cut is 88 minutes. And the director's cut is 92 minutes. And it's not just adding time, it's like it's re-edited. And I love that film. And at the end of it, Ash ends up in this post-apocalyptic world where he was in the medieval Evil Dead, he's in a cabin. Evil Dead 2, he's in a cabin again, but he gets transported to the medieval times. Army of Darkness is sort of like a slapstick comedy, fantasy adventure movie with elements of horror, but it's not really a horror film. And it's just this comedy. It's really funny with an amazing performance from Bruce Campbell. And then they set up this sequel, which is at the end of Army of Darkness, he takes the magic potion and he ends up that he slept too long and now he's in the future. In the UK cut, in the American cut, he ends up back in a supermarket and he has a fight with a witch.
That's the one I've seen.
And 20 years later, you get the Ash vs. Evil Dead TV series, which is a sequel to the American release of Army of Darkness. But the UK cut has this different ending where he wakes up in the future and Big Ben is all fucked up and he's surrounded by sort of like twisted metal and manufactured products and all this other stuff.
That sounds better. That sounds like the better ending.
He's got this big long beard and it sets it up so that we've done Evil Dead 2 and Evil Dead. They're like one thing for me, right?
Yeah.
That's a horror movie. You got Army of Darkness, which is a fantasy adventure, sword and sorcery, medieval romp, right? And then the next one, Evil Dead 4, would have been this futuristic science fiction apocalyptic movie, what, like Mad Max, I guess, or something like that, where you've got Ash fighting all of these Deadites. And that's the film I want. There was 100%. Even in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was even an interview with the Coen brothers because the Coen brothers, Joel Coen did the sound editing on the original Evil Dead, and that's how they met. And then they've got loads of films that connect them together where, they made a film called Crime Wave set in Hudsucker Prison, which was a Sam Raimi film starring Bruce Campbell was in it. And then they made Hudsucker Proxy, which was written by Sam Raimi and the Coen brothers, but directed by the Coen brothers, and Bruce Campbell was in that. And then they both made, the Coen brothers made Fargo, which has a video, which has a TV clip of Bruce Campbell in a soap opera. And then they made Fargo, and then Sam Raimi made A Simple Plan, which was kind of like his take on Fargo, which was based on a book. So they all love each other and all connected. There was an interview of the Coen brothers in the late 90s, early 2000s, who was basically saying, this is going to be a really long episode, by the way, guys, I'll tell you now. He was saying that at the end of, they were saying that basically Sam Raimi had written a script about Bruce Campbell at a petrol station fighting Deadites. And you go, just make that. And I liked Ash versus Evil Dead. I thought it was a fine TV series. But what I think we all wanted was a direct sequel to Army of Darkness during the 90s, which was peak Bruce Campbell, peak Sam Raimi. And I just don't think that there was enough interest in it at the time. It became a huge cult classic. Everyone got behind it. And then they made the TV series, which again got pirated so much that nobody got a subscription to Stars, which was sort of ahead of its time. And I think that now a streaming service, if you put an Evil Dead show on a streaming service, it would be a big hit.
Yeah.
I think you needed projects like that to get streaming services going. But it's a shame that Evil Dead was one of the ones that took one of the hits early, where it didn't get enough views to sustain it.
Yeah.
And I think now it would be perfect, but it was just maybe a few years before its time and it wasn't sustainable. But
so your dream sequel, if you can make it, would be a follow-on from the UK ending of Army of Darkness.
a 1990s Evil Dead 4, which was specifically a sequel to the UK release
love it.
Army of Darkness. That would be my
Well, we
dream.
make this a podcast. Would you keep Raimi as directing? Would that be?
Yeah, it's his. He writes them, he directs them. He's the best. And Bruce Campbell, when he's like young and flexible and can throw himself on the floor with his own hand, it's just like his physically was incredible. Like when you watch Evil Dead 2, it's not quite up there with Buster Keaton, but it's kind of like no one else was even close. So he was doing silent movie comedy in the 80s, you know.
You've read his book, the first one, was it The Actor of a B Movie, wherever it is?
Yeah,
when they just
Chins
literally
Could Kill.
Yeah, sorry, that one. And they just planted him on front of a camera on a plank of wood and then just run him through the woods, like don't care what hits him on the way. It's just
it's like the amount of abuse that they
it's incredible.
Which
is so inspiring.
Which is what I think is sort of like a compliment when you look at characters like Stretch from Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, to say she even sort of, you know, the fact that performance evokes Bruce Campbell is kind of like, she must have gone through absolute shit. She must have had fake blood poured on her for days and weeks, and it must have been absolutely miserable making that. But it's a great performance, and Bruce Campbell, just the all-time greatest. If it wasn't a sequel to Evil Dead, it would be a sequel to Bubba Hotep, where it was Bruce Campbell playing Elvis again, but this time
Hotep.
It's such a good film, and they should have made a sequel to that, but it never got off the ground. But they were going to make Bubba Nosferatu, and you just go, just give Bruce Campbell the time and the space to he should have been Batman. He should have been this huge movie star, and he's kind of like, he's so charismatic and he's so funny and he's so good looking and he's so sort of like, he can do his own stuff. He's brilliant. And you just say, why isn't he the biggest thing on the planet?
Yeah. Have you ever got to meet him?
Yeah, I've met him twice.
Have you got to tell him all these ideas?
No. I'm kind of like, I never need to meet my heroes. I never need to meet anyone. It's kind of like, I like the fact that, it's like with Alice Cooper, I've met him a couple of times. He doesn't remember me. He's a big deal to me. He's given me so much over the years that doesn't include meeting him. You know, all of his music, all of the concerts I've been to see. I love paying my money to go and see him in a concert, and I love paying my money to buy a T-shirt, and I love the whole process of that. Right? I know what the transaction is. I know I'm a fan. He's the guy on stage, and I don't need to hang out with him. I don't need to meet him. I don't need to do any of that. And I sort of, I met him a few times, and I kind of like, you just want to get through those scenarios without humiliating yourself, you know? They say don't meet your fan. They say don't meet your heroes. They say never meet your heroes. And the idea is that your hero is going to let you down somehow.
Yeah.
You know? But actually, it's because you're going to be a dick.
That's it. That's 100% what I think is don't meet your hero. I don't want to meet my heroes because, well, you know,
Well, it's a pleasure
I'm
to be
worried
here, by
I'm
the
going to
way.
make a copy of myself.
But yeah, it's exactly that.
It's funny you say that, Nick, but honestly, like before you came on, I was saying to Dave, this is the first one of these I've done where I'm actually a bit nervous because you are someone that I actually really like. And so
But wasn't I smashing? Wasn't I absolutely smashing?
You were brilliant.
I put you at ease straight away. We hit the ground running. We've talked for an hour and 42 minutes. We've had a lot of fucking fun.
We have.
When you get Nick Helm on your podcast, you get an hour, but you get another 45 minutes. That's for sure. I'm assuming it's an hour. I don't know. I didn't look into it. But the thing is that you'll always say something or you'll do something that you'll remember forever that you cringe at.
Yeah.
And people, and I'll do like signings after my gigs and I'll sign stuff and I'll meet people. And 99% of the time, we have this lovely sort of like human transaction where I'll talk to them and they'll talk to me. We'll have a little chat and then they'll move on and then I'll talk to the next person and we'll have, and 99% of the time, it's lovely. And then you'll get someone that comes up to me and goes, "All right, you big old cunt, how's it going?" And it's sort of like, What do you want me to say to that? I'm not on stage. I'm just literally a human being stood in front of you. And it's just like, how well do you think this interaction is going to go? And I always go, I've met Bruce Campbell and I've met Alice Cooper. And I know that tomorrow you're going to regret this. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon for the rest of your life. And I always try and help people through those moments where you go, what do you really want to talk to me about? You know, but yeah, I've met Bruce Campbell.
What do you think of this? Because they're going to do they are doing now a fourth Evil Dead filming now, I think.
Yeah,
what do you think of that?
It will be a fifth because they made the Evil Dead Well, what was it? It was sort of a remake, but at the end there was a really weird cameo from Bruce Campbell in it, which didn't really make any sense.
No.
So because it wasn't set up as a sequel, and there were different rules to the book, so it wasn't the same book. It felt like it was a remake, and then they tied it into the original franchise, which I think they shouldn't have done. I thought the Evil Dead, I've seen the Evil Dead films so many times, right? I have not seen the Evil Dead remake many times. I've seen it maybe 1.5 times. I think that's my best insult for a film. I saw it once, didn't like it, thought I'll give it another go, still didn't like it halfway through, so I stopped. I do like the original. I think I do like the first remake that they did. It's a cabin in the woods, and I think there's so much of it that's familiar, but is different. It's a straight horror film. There's very little comedy in it, if any. There's loads of practical effects in it, which I really admire. I think it's directed really well. They visualize the evil, which is just sort of like a camera trick in the trilogy. So I don't like the fact that they visualized it. And also I thought what was a really brilliant take on it, which it doesn't really live up to, but the take was that she was a heroin addict that they take to a cabin in the middle of nowhere so that she's away from drugs, she's away from her drug dealers, and it's her support group, and they take her into this cabin in the woods. They awaken the evil, and for a large portion of it they think it's her, on this massive come down, and they don't. And I think that's such a brilliant way of kind of like, that seems like familiar but fresh and different. Great, I love it. You end up with a final girl, and you kind of go, what made the Evil Dead films sort of stand out from all the other horror films was that you had a male lead, and so it's kind of like it felt a little bit more like in keeping with every other horror film. So I thought it had sort of potential, but it didn't really live up to it. But I think it's a good film. Unfortunately, there are 3 much better films that it's following that have like a through line of one performance from Bruce Campbell, which evolves as you go through the 3 films, which is what I want out of an Evil Dead franchise, really. Right. Evil Dead, the new Evil Dead that they're making is set in a tower block, and you just think, why haven't they done that already? That's an incredible idea. That's like Attack the Block meets Evil Dead. That's like they've got a block of flats and someone. Why haven't they done that? It's always a cabin in the woods. Why is it always a cabin in the woods? Because it's cheap. But you're setting it in a block of flats. That's a brilliant idea. So the fact that they're doing something so different with it, I'm all on board for, and I think that that'll be incredible.
And those were Nick Helm's Unequal Sequels. Oh my God. What an episode. What an episode. 3 movies I'd never seen before, which is always my favourite. I love it when I get to watch movies I've never seen before. Agree with everything he said, of course. And also, I feel a little bit like Nick Helm took the piss out of me, which is kind of like a life goal. I love it.
I like to think that now we're best friends with Nick Helm.
I genuinely wish we were. I was a little bit starstruck, I've got to be honest. I was a little bit babbly and talk nonsense, I'm sure. But hey, who wouldn't be?
It was great. It was so much fun. Thank you, Nick, so much for coming on our podcast. We really appreciate you coming on. Like we said, we're massive fans of your comedy. We played it down, but we really love Uncle.
Yeah.
So, and we love your comedy. And if you are interested in Nick's comedy, he is going on tour pretty soon. So check his website. He will tell you, hopefully.
Nick is on tour with his Masterworks in Progress tour 2021.
Sounds wonderful. What else have we got to tell the kind
I'm just so excited that you're here and listening. Thank you. Thanks for coming. We are on the internet, of course. We're on all the social medias at Unequal Sequel on Instagram and Twitter. Follow us on there. Check us out. We also have an email address, which is unequalsequel@hotmail.com. Okay, starting season 2 was me to carry on. I got it right. That's nice to see.
Perfect.
And yeah, just let's drop us a message. Let us know what you like, what you like about the show. Maybe don't tell us what you don't like. It's fine. It's all right.
Give us a like and subscribe. Please give us a review on Apple or 5 stars on Acast. Shit like that really does help. Annoyingly help promote us and get our name out there a little bit more, because we're an independent podcast. And we are battling with some very big names.
We're not really battling, to be honest. It's not like we're in competition with anyone, because we love all these podcasts that we're in as well, And in fact, we're going to be on some other podcasts too. So listen out for those, and we'll promote some other podcasts as we go, because we're all in this pod family together.
Yes.
And, we all want everyone to listen. And on that note, if you really like sequels, go and have a listen to the Sequelizers podcast too, because those guys are brilliant. They are a cut above us intellectually when it comes to movies. Go and give them a listen.
I can't argue with that. I can't argue.
But do come back. If this is the first episode of this you've listened to, there are 30 odd more episodes for you to go and listen to, including all the extras as well. So go back to give season 1 a try. There are some really great guests on there. If you like comedians, you will find some more comedians on there too. But also some really, really great other people giving us their favourite sequels. And come back next Monday, for another brilliant episode with another brilliant person. I'm not going to tell you who it is, though, because that would spoil the surprise.
No. Thank you from me, and thank you from the big man.
Bye!
Not. I normally say bye, and he does it. He got confused by that.
You're going to keep that in and not cut it out now,
and a
aren't
bye
you?
from him. No, let's wrap. It's a bye from me
Bye.
and a bye from him. Have a good week. See you next week.
Cheers, mate.
Bye.